What if the very system that was meant to protect you, the people sworn to uphold justice, were the ones who betrayed you? Imagine a woman, a teacher, a beloved wife, whose world is shattered in an instant, her life stolen away by a crime she didn't commit. This is the story of Emma Carrington, an innocent woman who was wrongfully convicted of murder, her voice silenced, her future destroyed, all because a system built on lies and power chose to believe a story that wasn't hers. Emma's fight for freedom would become a battle against everything she once believed in, where the most unlikely allies would emerge and the truth, so carefully buried, would claw its way to the surface. Betrayed by those she trusted, Emma would learn that the road to justice was not just long but filled with unimaginable obstacles. But no one could have prepared her for what would come next. For years, Emma Carrington fought alone in the darkness of a prison cell, accused of murdering her husband, Tom. The evidence seemed clear. Fingerprints on the gun, a locked door with no signs of forced entry, and her own confession under duress. Everyone thought they knew the story, that Emma was the cold-blooded killer who had taken her husband's life. But Emma knew the truth. Tom had been her world. He had been everything to her, and his death had torn her apart. But despite the overwhelming evidence, something didn't add up. It was in the weeks following her conviction that Emma realized the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The trial, the investigation, it had all been one big setup. A carefully constructed lie woven by the most unlikely of culprits. James Carrington, the ruthless district attorney who had prosecuted her. James, with his sharp smile and well-tailored suits, was the face of justice in the town. He had built a career on bringing down criminals, and Emma's case was just another notch in his belt. But what no one knew was that James had ties to the underworld, a hidden life of corruption and greed that ran deeper than anyone could have guessed. And the more Emma learned, the more she realized that she was nothing but a pawn in his game. As she sat in her cell, Emma's frustration grew. Her attempts to find a way out, to prove her innocence, had been fruitless. But then one night as she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling above her, a thought occurred to her. What if there was something more to Tom's death? What if the clues, the evidence, the whole case had been manipulated? Emma began to dig deeper into her own memories, replaying the night of Tom's murder in her mind over and over again. She remembered Tom's phone call just before he died, his voice frantic, desperate, but he had said nothing that made sense. He had sounded scared. But why? That's when she made a discovery. The phone call Tom made to her that night had been from his cell phone, but his phone had been found on the kitchen counter, untouched. Something wasn't right. With a newfound determination, Emma began to quietly investigate her own case. She spent hours in the prison library researching legal loopholes, rereading her trial transcripts, and even looking into the detectives who had worked on her case. She stumbled upon something no one had noticed. Detective Rachel Grant, one of the lead investigators, had a questionable history. Emma dug further, finding multiple cases where Rachel had been involved in fabricating evidence or failing to follow proper procedures. But there was more. Emma discovered that Rachel had been involved with James Carrington, an affair that could have easily clouded her judgment in Emma's case. This revelation opened a door Emma hadn't expected. She began to wonder if the corruption reached farther than just the prosecutor. Could the investigation itself have been compromised? But Emma wasn't alone in her search for the truth. An unlikely ally, Robert Pierce, a former prison inmate who had been following her case, contacted her. Robert, who had done time for a lesser charge, had heard about Emma's story and believed in her innocence. He had spent months quietly gathering information, tracking down leads that no one else seemed interested in. And what he uncovered would change everything. Robert discovered that a security camera outside the Carrington residence had been tampered with on the night of the murder. The footage, once thought to be lost, was now retrievable. When Emma received the footage, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the grainy video, was James Carrington, leaving the house long after the time of death. Not only had he been present at the scene, but he had also been caught carrying a briefcase filled with documents that could have linked him to illicit activities. The game had changed. With this new evidence, Emma's lawyer, Lisa Morgan, filed for an appeal. The wheels of justice, though slow, began to turn in Emma's favor. James Carrington's criminal ties were exposed, and soon the truth of his involvement in Tom's murder began to surface. The power shift was palpable. James, the man who had once seemed untouchable, was now a suspect in a case that threatened to unravel his entire career. His reputation crumbled as the public learned of his corruption, and the once proud district attorney was arrested for his role in Tom's death. Emma's conviction was overturned, and she was finally free, released from the prison where she had been wrongfully held for years. The world outside was different, but Emma was determined to rebuild her life. She had fought so long for her freedom, and now she was ready to reclaim what had been taken from her. But the emotional scars of her imprisonment would take time to heal. The betrayal of the justice system, the pain of losing her husband, and the isolation she had endured haunted her every step. But just as Emma began to breathe freely again, another twist came. A letter arrived in her mailbox one morning, sealed with a familiar, chilling stamp. It was addressed to Emma, but the handwriting on the front sent a shiver down her spine. It was from Tom's best friend, Jack Miller, the man who had always been there for them, the man she had trusted. The letter was brief, yet its words were clear. "I know the truth, Emma. You're not the only one who's been keeping secrets. And now you've opened Pandora's box. They'll come for you just as they did for me." Emma read the words over and over again, her heart pounding in her chest. Jack knew more about Tom's death than he had ever let on. But why now? And who was Jack protecting? The walls around Emma started to close in again. Just when she thought she had escaped, the truth became more dangerous than she ever imagined. Emma Carrington had thought that her fight for freedom was over. The walls of the prison had finally come down, the chains of her wrongful conviction shattered, and the truth about James Carrington's involvement in her husband Tom's murder had been exposed. The public was outraged, and James, once untouchable, was now in custody, facing charges that would likely end his career and his freedom. Emma, now out of prison, could finally begin to rebuild her life. But then the letter arrived from Jack Miller, Tom's best friend, the man Emma had trusted with her heart and her life. His words haunted her. They were unsettling, like a cold gust of wind that stirred the ashes of a fire she thought had gone out. "I know the truth, Emma. You're not the only one who's been keeping secrets. And now you've opened Pandora's box. They'll come for you just as they did for me. Jack." The man who had stood by them, always supportive, always reassuring. She never questioned his loyalty. But his words left a bitter taste in her mouth. What secret could he possibly be hiding? The first few days after receiving the letter were a blur. Emma tried to push it out of her mind, thinking that maybe it was just an attempt to stir up old memories, to twist the knife. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. She had to know more. She needed to understand what Jack had meant. So, she did what she had done all those years in prison. She fought for the truth. Emma reached out to Robert Pierce, the former prison inmate who had helped her uncover the hidden footage of James Carrington. She trusted him. Robert had proven himself to be an ally when she was at her lowest. He didn't ask questions. He simply helped. "Robert," Emma said on the phone, her voice a little shaky. "I need you to look into something for me. It's about Jack Miller. Can you find out where he is?" "Are you sure about this?" Robert's voice crackled through the receiver, his concern evident. "I don't know yet," Emma replied, her hand tightening around the phone. "But I have to know what's going on." Robert agreed to dig into Jack's whereabouts, and within days he came back with something Emma hadn't expected. Jack wasn't where he was supposed to be. In fact, he hadn't been seen in over a month. "No one's heard from him. And the last time anyone spoke to him was just after your trial," Robert reported, his voice low and grim. "He left town, Emma. Without a trace." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Jack had disappeared. The man she had trusted, the man who had stood by her in her darkest hours, was gone. But why would he leave? And why did his disappearance feel so wrong, so deliberate? The more Emma thought about it, the more she realized that Jack's warning wasn't just about protecting a secret. It was about danger. Real danger. The same danger that had once been aimed at her. Emma began to piece the puzzle together. Tom's murder had always seemed like a simple case, one of domestic violence gone wrong, a jealous wife snapping under pressure. But it was all a lie. James Carrington had been the mastermind orchestrating the entire thing. And now, with Jack gone, it seemed like there were others who wanted to make sure that no one uncovered the truth about what had really happened that night. It wasn't just about Tom's death anymore, it was about power. A hidden network of people who were willing to do anything to protect their interests, to keep their secrets buried. And Jack, in some twisted way, had been part of it all. Emma's investigation into Jack's disappearance led her to another unsettling revelation: Tom's financial records. Before his death, Tom had been a mild-mannered man who kept a relatively simple life. But in the months leading up to his murder, there had been an unexplained change in his spending habits. Large sums of money had been transferred to accounts that didn't belong to him, accounts that were untraceable. And one name appeared repeatedly: Gerald Thornton, a known figure in the world of organized crime. The more Emma uncovered, the more she realized that Tom's murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a calculated move, part of something much larger, much darker than anyone could have anticipated. Tom had stumbled into something dangerous, something that had cost him his life. And now Emma was caught in the web of it. With Robert's help, Emma tracked down Gerald Thornton's last known location. The man was a ghost, always moving, always one step ahead. But they couldn't stop now. They had to find him. They had to understand what he knew about Tom's death, and why he was connected to Jack Miller. As Emma prepared to confront the very people who had orchestrated Tom's murder, she began to receive anonymous messages. The first one came late at night. "Stop digging, Emma. You're not ready for the truth. There's still time to walk away." The next message was more direct. "We know where you are. Stop looking for Jack. Leave it alone." But Emma refused to back down. She had been wrongfully convicted once before. She wasn't going to let it happen again. With her mind set, Emma and Robert traveled to a remote cabin on the outskirts of town, where they had tracked down Thornton's location. It was quiet there, too quiet. The kind of place that felt abandoned, lost in time. As they approached the cabin, Emma's heart began to race. Was this where she would find the answers? Or had they walked straight into a trap? They entered the cabin cautiously, with every step feeling like the last. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the unknown hanging over them. And then they found it, a small file hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside, Emma found the names of everyone involved in the plot, including the one name that struck her to the core: Jack Miller. Emma's stomach dropped as she stared at the file. Jack hadn't just been Tom's friend, he had been involved in everything from the beginning. The betrayal was more complete than she ever could have imagined. But just as she began to process the shock, a voice came from behind her. "Looking for something, Emma?" She froze. Gerald Thornton stood in the doorway, a menacing grin on his face. Emma and Robert spun around to face him, but it was too late. Before Emma could react, Thornton's men stormed into the cabin, surrounding them. The air in the cabin was thick with the weight of impending danger. Gerald Thornton stood just inside the doorway, his presence filling the small room, his cold smile stretching unnervingly across his face. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. The file she had just uncovered, containing the names of everyone involved in Tom's murder, was now in the hands of someone who would stop at nothing to protect his empire. "Looking for something, Emma?" Thornton's voice was smooth, dripping with mockery. His eyes scanned her and Robert, sizing them up like prey. "I can't tell you how disappointed I am. You really thought you could dig up the past without consequences?" Emma's hands trembled, but she clenched her fists to steady herself. This was it, the final confrontation. But she wasn't about to let fear rule her now. Not after everything she had been through. "I know what you're doing, Thornton. You killed Tom to cover your tracks. And now you think you can kill me too? You'll never get away with it." Thornton chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? You're not the first to get in my way. And you won't be the last. You've been a problem from the start, Emma. I let you think you were winning, let you believe there was hope. But this is where your story ends." Emma's gaze darted around the room, desperately looking for an escape route. But the men Thornton had brought with him blocked every exit. Robert, who stood beside her, his body tense, had no idea what to do. He had been her ally, but now, even he seemed uncertain about their next move. "Give me the file, Emma," Thornton demanded, his voice growing colder. "And maybe I'll let you and your friend leave here in one piece." "Maybe." Emma's stomach twisted. She couldn't give him the file. She knew that it was the key to everything, the evidence that could finally bring down the corrupt empire Thornton had built. But if she didn't, her life would end here. She needed a way out. She needed a plan, and fast. Her mind flashed back to the night she was first arrested, the moment she realized how deep the corruption ran. The lies, the betrayal, all of it. She had been underestimated from the start, just a simple woman with a quiet life. But now, Emma understood what had to be done. She wasn't powerless anymore. "I'm not giving it to you," Emma said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I'll take this to the authorities. And when I do, you'll have nowhere to run. No more lies, no more hiding." Thornton's eyes narrowed, his smile fading into something darker. He stepped forward, raising his hand, signaling his men to approach. Emma knew that the odds were against her, but she wasn't going to die here without a fight. Suddenly there was a loud crash. The door to the cabin flew open with such force that it rattled on its hinges, and in the doorway stood a figure Emma hadn't expected, Detective Rachel Grant. "Step away from them, Thornton," Rachel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She was holding a gun, her expression hard and determined. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Could it really be Rachel? The same detective who had been involved in her wrongful conviction? The one she had once believed was part of the corruption? But now, as she stood there in front of her, gun drawn, Rachel's face was filled with an emotion Emma couldn't quite place. Anger, yes, but also something else. Something regretful. Thornton, momentarily caught off guard, didn't immediately react. His eyes flicked between Rachel and Emma. "You don't have the guts, Rachel. You've been with me too long. Don't think you can just walk away from all this." Rachel's hand trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not walking away. I'm fixing my mistakes. The truth is finally coming out, Thornton. And it's going to cost you everything." The cabin fell into a heavy silence, the two sides locked in a deadly standoff. Emma's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Had Rachel really turned against Thornton? Was she here to help her? "Give me the file, Emma," Rachel said softly, her eyes flicking to the folder in Emma's hand. "You have to trust me. You're not alone anymore." Emma's grip tightened on the file. This was the moment of truth. Could she trust Rachel? Could she trust anyone in this town anymore? But in that instant, the desperation in Rachel's eyes told Emma that this was her chance. The chance to finally expose everything, to bring the system crashing down, to take back her life. Without a second thought, Emma handed over the file. She wasn't just handing it over to Rachel, she was putting her faith in something larger than herself. She was fighting for justice, for the truth, for Tom's memory. But just as Rachel took the file from her, there was a sudden sound behind them, a noise that sent a chill down Emma's spine. Bang! A gunshot echoed through the cabin. Everything seemed to slow down. Emma's heart froze as she turned, her eyes wide with shock. Robert had fallen to the floor, his body jerking as the bullet struck him. He hadn't been the intended target. The shot had come from Thornton's men, who had been waiting for this moment. Rachel reacted instantly, diving behind cover with Emma, the file still in her hand. The men who had surrounded them now moved with a sense of urgency, closing in on their position. It was chaos, everything happening too fast for Emma to comprehend. "Stay down," Rachel shouted, pulling Emma to the ground beside her. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps. Robert's blood stained the wooden floor as he struggled to breathe. There was no time for mourning. There was no time for anything but survival. They had come so far, and now it seemed like everything was falling apart. "Is this how it ends?" Emma whispered, more to herself than to Rachel. "Is this where I die?" Rachel's voice was low, fierce. "No. This is where they die." The battle was on, and Emma was about to find out just how far she would have to go to finish the fight. She wasn't the woman they thought she was anymore. She was stronger, more determined than ever. But in the midst of the gunfire, one question lingered in her mind: would she ever truly be free? The sound of gunfire rang out again, and the cabin was plunged into a chaotic blur. Emma and Rachel were crouched behind an old wooden table, the only cover they had from the barrage of bullets. The air was thick with tension, the walls echoing with the sharp cracks of gunfire and the desperate sounds of Robert's ragged breathing. Emma's mind raced, each second feeling like an eternity. Robert was down, blood pooling around him, and every instinct in Emma screamed that she had to do something. But she couldn't let fear take control. They had come this far. They weren't going to be silenced now. The men who had entered the cabin, Thornton's enforcers, were closing in. Emma could hear their footsteps, heavy and deliberate, as they circled the room, trying to pin them down. She glanced at Rachel, whose eyes were locked on the door, gun raised, calculating their next move. But it wasn't just the men that had her on edge. It was the question of where the hell Thornton was. "Stay low," Rachel hissed, her voice a low whisper. "We need to make a run for it. I've got the file. We can still expose them." Emma nodded, but her mind kept drifting to Robert. Would they make it out alive? How could she live with herself if they didn't? She had trusted him, and now he was on the floor, barely holding on. Suddenly, the cabin door swung open with a violent force, and there, standing in the doorway, was Gerald Thornton, his eyes cold and triumphant, a smirk on his lips. He looked unscathed, as if he had been watching the whole thing unfold from the shadows. "Did you really think you could win, Emma?" he sneered, stepping further into the room. "You've been playing checkers in a game of chess. I've known every move you'd make. Every step. You were never going to get away." Emma's heart pounded as she watched him, her hands shaking with adrenaline. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about exposing him once and for all. "I'm not afraid of you," Emma shouted, her voice gaining strength. "The truth is already out. And it's over for you." Thornton's grin only widened, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else, something darker. "You really believe that? You really think a file will bring me down?" He took another step closer, his voice dropping lower. "You have no idea how deep this goes. Do you know who's backing me, Emma? No, you don't. And you'll never find out." Emma's mind spun. Who was he working for? Before she could react, there was a sudden movement. A man, dark and towering, stepped into the cabin behind Thornton. The shadowy figure moved like he owned the place, his gaze scanning the room, locking eyes with Emma for just a moment. "Boss, we have company," the man said coolly, his voice deep and foreboding. "Not for long," Thornton replied without hesitation. Emma's stomach twisted. Was this the end? The room felt suffocating and she had no escape. The truth about Tom, about her wrongful conviction, everything hinged on the decisions made in these next few seconds. She had one shot at survival. "Rachel," Emma whispered, "what do we do?" Rachel looked at her, her expression hard, unwavering. She didn't answer right away, but Emma could see the determination in her eyes. They weren't out of options yet. Before Thornton could take another step, the door slammed open again, this time from the outside. A shot rang out. The figure in the doorway collapsed to the floor in an instant. The men who had been circling the room froze. The shot had come from outside, but from where? Through the haze of smoke and confusion, Emma saw a figure standing at the threshold, their silhouette framed by the dim light outside. The man who had just fallen was still clutching his side, but the wound was fatal. And then, as the room went silent for a heartbeat, the figure in the doorway stepped forward, revealing who it was. "Jack Miller," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. Jack, Tom's best friend, the man who had disappeared without a trace, now stood before them. But he wasn't the man Emma had once known. His face was hard, his expression unreadable, and there was something cold in his eyes that Emma had never seen before. "Emma," Jack said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm sorry. I didn't want it to come to this, but they forced my hand." Thornton's eyes widened in shock. You've been working with them?" he spat, his voice laced with disbelief. Jack didn't respond right away. He looked at Emma, his gaze softening. "I didn't want you to get caught up in this, but I couldn't let you walk into it blind. I've been trying to get the evidence to you without them knowing. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did." "Why, Jack?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. "Why did you let me think you were the one who betrayed me? You knew everything all along?" Jack's jaw tightened. "I was protecting you, Emma. The truth was bigger than anything you or I could have imagined. It wasn't just about Tom. There were people involved in this, people I couldn't touch but you could." Suddenly the walls of the cabin felt like they were closing in. The truth was now within arm's reach, but Emma's mind was reeling. Jack was the key to it all, he had been there from the start. He had the answers, the connections, the leverage she needed to take down Thornton for good. Just as Emma took a step toward him, ready to demand the full truth, Thornton let out a furious growl. "You don't think this is over, do you?" he sneered. "You think you're going to walk out of here with that file and just leave me to rot? No, this is far from over. I have people in high places, Emma. And I will burn everything to the ground before I let you win." As Jack raised his weapon ready to strike, there was a loud crash from behind. The sound of footsteps. A shout. A moment of chaos. And then a voice, familiar, chilling, called out from behind Emma. "Don't move. Everyone freeze." The voice that had called out from behind Emma shattered the tension in the room like glass. It was chilling and commanding, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Every instinct in Emma screamed to turn around, but she was frozen. Her eyes locked on Jack, who stood motionless, gun raised, his expression hard and unreadable. The seconds stretched endlessly, the silence suffocating. The men around them, Thornton's henchmen, shifted, unsure of what to do. They weren't the only ones caught off guard. Even Gerald Thornton, the man who had thought himself untouchable, looked back over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing in confusion and fury. "Don't move." The voice was familiar, but it wasn't until Emma finally turned around that she saw Detective Rachel Grant standing at the doorway, her gun drawn, her face set in stone. The cold, calculated look in her eyes sent a chill down Emma's spine. "What the hell is this, Rachel?" Thornton snarled, his voice low and menacing. "You've sided with her now? You think you can just walk away from this? You don't know who you're messing with." Rachel's gaze never wavered. "I've known exactly who I'm messing with all along, Thornton," she said, her voice steady but dripping with contempt. "And I'm done playing your game." Emma's mind raced. Rachel was the last person she ever thought would be standing here, pointing a gun at Gerald Thornton, the man who had caused her so much pain. But here she was, ready to bring it all down. Was this redemption? Or was there still more to this twisted story than Emma could have imagined? I don't know what you think you're doing, Rachel, Jack spoke up, his voice clipped and guarded. But if you're here to play hero, you're too late. It's over. Rachel's eyes flicked to Jack, then back to Thornton. No, Jack. It's not over. But it will be soon. You're not walking away from this. Not now. Not ever. Thornton, ever the master of manipulation, took a step toward Rachel. You think you can take me down? You've been in my pocket for too long, Rachel. You're as much a part of this as I am. You think I don't know what you've been doing? The people you've been talking to? Rachel's grip on her gun tightened, but she didn't flinch. She stood her ground. You're wrong. You think I was just some pawn in your game. But you're the one who's been played all along. Thornton's expression darkened, his smile faltering for the first time. He took another step closer to Rachel, his fists clenched. I always knew you were weak, Rachel. I knew you'd crack eventually. You can't handle the pressure. You'll never have the guts to bring me down. For a moment, there was an eerie silence, the tension hanging thick in the air. Then, without warning, Emma spoke. You're wrong, Thornton. You think we're just puppets? Well, look at what you've done. You've made mistakes, huge ones. You left a trail. You underestimated me, you underestimated Rachel, and you underestimated the truth. Emma's voice wavered at the end, but her words cut through the tension, and for the first time she saw a crack in Thornton's icy facade. He was losing control. And that was when Emma realized, this was her moment. But just as the weight of her words started to settle in, the door to the cabin creaked open. The sound was faint but enough to make Emma's heart skip a beat. Another person? Another force in the mix? The figure that stepped inside was a tall man, his face partially obscured by the shadows. His voice, deep and commanding, filled the room. Drop your weapons. Emma's heart froze. This was it. Another betrayal? Another twist in this already twisted tale? She glanced at Rachel, whose face was unreadable, and Jack, whose expression turned from anger to confusion. Who the hell is this? Thornton growled, spinning toward the newcomer. But the figure in the doorway didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another step forward, and that was when Emma finally recognized the face. Detective Janelle Harper. Her heart nearly stopped. Detective Harper. The same woman who had worked tirelessly to expose the corruption in the police department, the woman who had once almost brought Emma's world crashing down. But now, there she was, standing between them, gun raised, the same fierce determination in her eyes that had driven her to fight for justice when everything seemed lost. Harper's gaze swept the room, taking in the chaos, the gunfight that had almost ensued. We're done here, she said, her voice unwavering. Thornton, you're under arrest. For Tom Carrington's murder. For the years of corruption. For everything. Thornton's face twisted with disbelief. You're making a huge mistake, Harper. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I think you'll find I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Harper replied, stepping forward with confidence. You and your network are finished. You won't get away with it. Not anymore. As the reality of the situation sank in, Thornton's smug expression faltered completely. He moved toward the door as if considering running, but Harper was faster. The sharp sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed in the room as she arrested him on the spot. Emma's legs went weak, her body trembling as the weight of what was happening hit her all at once. Thornton was finally going down. Justice was being served. But then, as Harper prepared to walk Thornton out, she paused and turned back to Emma. There's still something you need to know, Emma. We're not done yet. Emma's breath caught in her throat. What was left to uncover? Had she miscalculated again? Was there more to this than she realized? Harper's eyes softened, a flicker of compassion in them as she spoke. I found something connected to Tom. And it's not just Thornton who's been hiding the truth. There's someone else. Someone even closer than you think. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? Could it be Jack? Could it be someone even closer to home? And then, just as Emma was about to ask, the unmistakable sound of a phone buzzing filled the room. Harper's face turned pale. She glanced at the phone on the table, a message. Emma moved quickly to grab it, but Harper shook her head. No, you don't want to see this. But it was too late. The screen lit up, and the words scrolled in front of her eyes. The truth is buried deeper than you think, Emma. The past won't let you go. The message burned into Emma's mind, each word a chilling reminder that the darkness was far from over. She stared at the phone, her fingers trembling as the words, "The truth is buried deeper than you think, Emma. The past won't let you go," flashed before her eyes. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, suffocating her. Who was behind this? Who else could be involved in the twisted web of lies that had cost her everything? Harper's expression had hardened, her eyes flicking between Emma and the phone. "This isn't just over because Thornton is in custody," she said softly, her voice low but filled with something Emma couldn't quite place. "Concern maybe? There's more to this. There's someone else pulling the strings, someone who's still out there. And I think you know who they are." Emma's heart dropped. Her mind raced, trying to put together the pieces, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing parts. Who could it be? The message was too cryptic, too ominous. She couldn't afford to let her guard down now, not when she was so close to the truth. Not when her freedom was hanging by a thread. "Who are you talking about?" Emma asked, her voice thick with suspicion and fear. She had been through too much to trust anyone blindly now. After all the betrayals, the lies, the manipulation, who could she rely on? Harper took a deep breath, her eyes locking with Emma's. "I can't say just yet. But I need you to stay close. I'm going to get you the answers, but there's something I'm going to need from you. Something you'll hate to hear." Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the panic rising within her. Harper stepped closer, her face tense. "I need you to go back to the one person you trusted the most. I need you to talk to Robert." The name hit Emma like a physical blow. Robert? The man who had fought by her side, who had risked everything to help her expose the truth. She had watched him fall, blood pooling around him, and now Harper was telling her to seek him out again? Emma's throat tightened. "He's gone, Rachel. He's not." "I know," Harper interrupted softly, her voice full of sympathy. "But there's something you don't know about Robert. He wasn't just trying to help you. He was part of something bigger, Emma. The truth about him is the key to everything." Emma's world tilted. What was Harper implying? How could Robert have been involved in anything other than the fight for justice? What had he been hiding? "Robert was working with someone," Harper continued, her eyes dark with concern. "Someone you trust. Someone who you never would have suspected. And if we're going to end this, if we're going to get to the real truth about Tom and your conviction, we have to start there." Emma felt her stomach twist. Her mind was reeling with the possibility. Had Robert been playing her all along? Had everything she'd believed in been a lie? The guilt in her chest threatened to crush her. But no, she couldn't believe it. She wouldn't let herself. "I don't understand," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Who could he have been working with? Who was behind all of this?" Harper shook her head. "That's something you need to find out for yourself. But I'm telling you, Emma, Robert was more involved in this than you think. He didn't just uncover the truth about Thornton. He was part of a much deeper conspiracy. And the only way to truly free yourself is to understand what Robert was doing before it's too late." The words hung in the air, each one a heavy weight that threatened to pull Emma under. She was so close to finding the freedom she had fought for all these years. And now, Harper was asking her to reopen the wounds she had barely been able to close. Robert had always been her ally. How could he have been involved in this mess? But there was no time for doubts now. The fight wasn't over. The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. If Robert had a hand in this, then everything had been a lie. Everything. Harper's voice pulled Emma from her thoughts. "I'm going to give you one last piece of advice, Emma. No one is who they seem. No one is above the law. Not even the people you thought you could trust." Emma's heart hammered in her chest. The realization hit her all at once. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting to expose the truth, no matter what the cost. With a deep breath, Emma stood tall, her determination burning brighter than ever. She couldn't afford to back down now. Not when the stakes were this high. Not when the very foundation of everything she believed in was crumbling before her eyes. "I'll find out the truth, Rachel," Emma said, her voice steady now, her resolve stronger than ever. "I don't care what it takes. I won't stop until I uncover the whole damn thing." Rachel nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Good. But be careful, Emma. You have no idea who you're really up against." Just as Emma prepared to turn away, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. The door to the cabin opened with a creak and Emma froze, her body going rigid with fear. Had Thornton's men come back? Were they about to make one last attempt to silence her? But as the figure stepped into the room, Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was Robert. Robert stepped into the cabin, his movements slow and deliberate, as though every step he took was carefully measured. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had just started to make sense of everything only to have Robert, the very man she thought she could trust, appear at the most critical moment. His presence was both a relief and a threat. Could he really be the key to her freedom? Or was he just another piece in a much larger game? "Robert," Emma whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and hope. What are you doing here? I thought you were. I know you're angry, Emma, Robert interrupted, his voice heavy with regret. He lowered his gaze, avoiding her eyes. I've been keeping things from you. But I came here to tell you the truth, all of it. Rachel stepped forward, her hand still gripping her gun, though her expression softened. She clearly had questions too. Robert, you have a lot of explaining to do. We thought you were gone. We thought. I was trying to protect you, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. Trying to protect us both. But I see now that keeping secrets only made things worse. Emma's mind was spinning. She had trusted Robert. He had been her ally, the one person who fought alongside her when everyone else had abandoned her. He had risked his life to get the evidence to her, to help her expose Thornton. But now, as he stood before her, she could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. The truth she had been fighting for was slipping through her fingers. Protect us from what, Robert? Emma asked, her voice trembling with frustration. What are you not telling me? You said you were working with someone. Who? Robert finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with pain. I was working with Rachel, but there's more to it. The deeper I dug, the more I found out about Tom. He wasn't just some innocent victim. He was tangled up in something much bigger. And when Thornton realized what Tom knew, he made sure he didn't walk away. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? What did Tom know? Tom had been investigating Thornton long before you got involved, Robert continued. He was going to blow everything wide open. The corruption, the fraud, the murders. But he had something that Thornton couldn't afford to let him keep. Something that could bring down more than just his criminal empire. It was a list. A list of people that went all the way to the top. Politicians, law enforcement, businessmen, people who had covered for Thornton. Emma's blood ran cold. So, Tom was killed because of what he knew? Robert nodded. Yes, but I didn't realize it at the time. I thought he was just another victim of a corrupt system. I didn't know the full extent of it. But now I do. Rachel spoke up, her voice calm but firm. And I've been tracking this network for months. Everything points back to one person. Emma's eyes widened. Who? Your father. Robert's words hit Emma like a slap in the face. She took a step back, her mind reeling. What are you saying? My father? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want to believe it either, Robert admitted. But everything you've been through, everything you've uncovered, it all leads back to him. Your father was involved in Tom's murder. And he's been controlling everything from the shadows. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. Her father. The man who had abandoned her years ago, the one she had never understood, the one she thought had nothing to do with her fight. He was the puppet master behind it all. No, Emma said, her voice shaking with disbelief. This can't be true. My father? But why? Robert looked at her with sympathy. He's one of the people who has been helping cover Thornton's tracks for years. He made sure you stayed in prison. He made sure you never got out. Because if you did, you'd find out the truth. And if you found out the truth, his empire would fall. Everything he's built would be destroyed. Emma stumbled back, her thoughts racing. Her entire life, the years she had spent fighting for freedom, had been a lie. And the man who was supposed to protect her, her father, had been part of the very system she had fought so hard to bring down. Where is he? Emma asked, her voice breaking with emotion. Where is my father now? Robert shook his head, regret written all over his face. He's not here, Emma. But I know where he is. And if we don't act fast, he'll disappear again. We don't have much time. Rachel stepped forward, her gun still aimed at the floor. We need to go to the authorities. We need to make sure this is all on record. Your father can't be allowed to get away with this. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her father was the key to everything. He was the one who had orchestrated the corruption. He had been the one to ensure she stayed locked away. And now the truth was finally in her grasp. But as she looked at Robert and Rachel, a sense of dread washed over her. They were so close to ending this nightmare. But would they be able to expose her father's role in everything? Or would he escape again, slipping through their fingers? As they made their way out of the cabin, the distant sound of a car engine grew louder. Emma froze. Were they too late? The engine grew louder, and the headlights cut through the night, illuminating the road ahead. But it wasn't just any car. It was her father's car. The end? Thank you for watching. If you want to stay updated on more gripping true crime stories and uncover the darkest secrets behind the most shocking cases, subscribe to my channel. The fight for justice never ends. Stay tuned for more, and remember, not all truths come easily. Some of them are buried so deep, they'll take everything to uncover.